Bonjour tout le monde. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to the 7th event of the Feminist and Accessible Publishing, Communications, and Technology Speaker and Workshop Series. Thank you for the fantastic crew that made today's event possible, especially Element AI. I'd really like to thank personally Natasha and Mathieu for all of their work in making this possible, making sure we had all this great food. Also to QueerTech Montreal and Pride Hack Montreal. So thank you. I'm Dr. Alex Ketchum. I'm a professor at McGill University in the Feminist Studies Department and the organizer of this series. The Feminist and Accessible Publishing, Communications, and Technologies Practices Speaker and Workshop Series seeks to bring together scholars, creators, and people in industry working together at the intersections of digital humanities, computer science, feminist studies, disability studies, communication studies, LGBTQ studies, history, and critical race theory. I'm going to announce a few people to come up and talk one by one, and then I'll give you a little bit more background about the event series, and then I'll bring up Mimi. So first, I'd like to welcome up Sam Alvarez of QueerTech Montreal, who's going to say a couple words about the organization.
Hi, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? So my name is Sam Alvarez, and I am with QueerTech, and we are happily co-hosting this event. So who here has heard about QueerTech? Raise your hands. Wow, that's impressive. Very, very cool. For those of you who do not know about our organization, we are a local nonprofit, and what we strive to do is to foster learning, mentorship, and growth to empower LGBTQ2+ individuals in the tech industry. And I'm here to announce our upcoming event in October, which will be on the 24th of October at Shopify. And it's a very cool subject. It's entitled Access, Tech Job, Barriers and Opportunities. And this event is part of our series of educational events. And we will be featuring our guest speaker, Anna Lidico. Very cool. She's a drag queen from New York City and also a software engineer at Google. So figure that out. I hope to see you all there in great numbers. And also just want to encourage you to continue to follow QueerTech and support our initiatives throughout the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I'd also like to invite Guy from Pride Hack to come and say a couple words about Pride Hack, and also try to stop kicking the furniture.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Guy. I'm also with QueerTech. And just a quick word about Pride Hacks. Pride Hacks is a QueerTech program that we run once a year. And it's a hackathon that's a little bit different of your normal, the hackathon you might have heard of. In Pride Hacks, what we do is we take actual problems that LGBTQ2S+ nonprofits in Montreal and Canada in general face, and we're trying to solve these problems in a day and a half of coding. And just last month, we had our 2019 edition, which was a big success with around 140 people attending and coding. And in November, we're gonna host our showcase for Pride Hacks 2019, where we're gonna publish our impact report to show how does this event and program actually impact the community and the people in the community. And we welcome everyone to join us in November. We'll publish the date soon. Look it up online, either on our QueerTech channels or pridehacks.co or .com. And yeah, hope to see you soon.
Thank you. So I just want to give a little background about this speaker series. So part of the motivation of this series is that the kinds of solutions that are often proffered to make technology and publishing more accessible, often such as open access and innovative new technologies. It's often spoken of as so generally innovative new technologies. They often romanticize and fetishize technological alternatives and don't look at how inequity can be perpetuated or only shifted, especially at the level of algorithms. As we seek to draw attention to power relations that have been invisibilized, it's important that we acknowledge Canada's long colonial history and its present. political practices. We're currently located on an unceded Indigenous territory. This series was made possible by SSHRC, multiple organizations at McGill, including the Institute for Gender, Sexuality, and Feminist Studies, Element AI, MILA, and more. Please check out our website and social media for a list of upcoming talks. There's 22 events this year. Meredith Whitaker of the AI Now Institute is coming to speak. Ruha Benjamin, author of the New Jim Code, is speaking, as well as Abigail Ecohawk, who's talking about decolonizing data. In case you have any friends who wanted to come today but couldn't, Mimi's also going to be talking tomorrow at McGill. It's also free and open to the public. There's no pizza or beer, unfortunately, but they can still come out. All of our events are free and open to the public, and when possible, also published online. The next event is happening on September 19th with Sarah Myers-West of the AI Now Institute talking about AI and intersectionality, and they'll be housed at McGill's campus. So now for today's event. Mimi Onuoha is a Brooklyn-based new media artist and researcher whose work deals with the missing and obscured remnants forged from a society based on automation. Through layerings of code, text, interventions, and objects, she seeks to explore the ways in which people are abstracted, represented, and classified. She's had many artist residencies, including here in Montreal at Studio XX, also at Data and Society, Columbia University's Tao Center, and many more. She is currently at NYU. Today she'll be talking about her work in absentia. So thank you for coming, and I'd like to welcome Mimi Onuoha.
Hey everyone. Hello, it's so good to be here. Okay, so I wrote down all the people and groups who helped make this happen. I think it's QueerTech, QueerTech Montreal, Element AI, IGSF at McGill's Feminist Center, just also doing work in the digital humanities and computer science and Pride Hacks. So I don't feel very much pressure at all to deliver to all of these groups. But really, thanks Simon, thanks Natasha, thanks Alex, thanks Mathieu, thanks everyone. If I could speak French, I would say a little greeting in French to all of you. Mais mon français est très mauvais. I tried. Thank you. Okay, so let's just jump right in. I want to start with a story. It is a story that actually I wrote a few years ago when I was working as a data journalist at this news publication called Quartz. And the story is kind of explicit. You can see it in the title. That's how Quartz makes you write titles for headlines for stories. And what the story is about is how for all of the location-based data that Google has, there are still some places that don't show up on the map. And we know this because if we look at the satellite data, the raster data, we do see it. But when we look at the geo data, we actually don't see anything. So I'll give you a few examples. This is Makoko. This is this floating lake community off the coast of Lagos from Nigeria. So been here. You can see. Yep, that's satellite imagery. There's the map. So it says that there are around 100,000 people who live here. I think there are actually more. There are quite a few of these lake communities in Lagos, especially in Nigeria. We'll stay in Africa for a minute to get to Chad. So the Lake Fitri drainage basin is home to around 2 million people. This is just one little, one section of it. You will see. Not much shows up. Maybe you have an idea of what you're going to see with this. This is, here we're in the Gobi Desert. We see pretty much the same story. And this is my favorite one. I'll tell you why much later. But this is in Rio. This is in Brazil. This is one of the favelas. And I don't know how well y'all can see it. Actually, some of these places do show up on this one. Some of them do show up. Maybe, can any of you see that? There are a few that maybe you sort of can. So this of all of them is the one that probably is the most mapped. So my question for you is, what is happening here? What are we seeing in all of this? It's a question for you, but it's mostly a question for me, since I'm the one who has a microphone and I have to talk. So I think it would be very tempting to say that this is a story about Google erasing small communities or trying to erase informal communities. That's very tempting because it is a story that we see a lot of places, and it's a story that's often true. However, it is not the story that's happening here. And we know this for two reasons. The first reason has to do with that last one, the Rio, the favela example. So ahead of the 2016 Summer Olympics, Google spent a ton of money trying to map different parts of the favelas in Rio. They even partnered with some local nonprofits there. It was actually really great. Even still, only 2% of favelas in Rio are mapped. The other way that we know that it's not just the story of Google trying to screw over local small communities is that there's other mapping software apart from Google Maps. We could use something else. Have any of y'all heard of OpenStreetMap, any chance? Great, okay, cool. So that's like a community, like open source, community driven mapping platform. And if you go there, you would see pretty much the same story. So what is happening here? That is my question. And that's kind of, that's the question that I sort of want to explore for the rest of this talk. And part of why I want to do that is because that's sort of what I do. So my name is Mimi, I'm an artist, as Alex explained, which is in my bio. This is just a video, you don't need the sound. So I'm an artist. I spend a lot of my time thinking about things like those maps. What are places that don't show up on the map? And I spend a lot of time thinking about what it means for things not to show up, or what it means for us to look at the social implications of a lot of the technology that we use. But I do this through a lot of different ways. So sometimes I do workshops, sometimes I have installation pieces, sometimes I create websites, I write code. I often find myself using a lot of technological forms. So like like I said, I work with big data sets, work with code, work with algorithms, but then trying to use them so that I can point out some of the contradictions within them, like inherent within them, or some of the complications within them. But pretty much everything I do starts at this point. It starts at the point of looking at data. And I know this is like a QueerTech event, and we're here at Element AI, so I won't go too much into defining data, but I will say, this makes me sound very nerdy, I know, but I have one of my favorite definitions of data that I will say, which is from this Australian academic, Mitchell Whitelaw, and he says that data are measurements extracted from the flux of the real. I know, it's nice. I like it. It has like a poetry to it. It kind of gets at this idea. This idea of extraction, I think, kind of ties to like natural resources, which can be useful. So when we think about data, what we mean is pretty much anything in the world that is quantified. That's what we talk about. Great. Okay. So I usually have my notes on my laptop, but we can't do that with this setup here. So, right, so we talk about things that are quantified, but in addition, we can think about we can also think about ourselves as being sources of data nowadays through things like biometrics, facial recognition, eye scanning. Maybe y'all know about these technologies. These are all ways in which data is not just about the world around us, but also about us, about humans, about us becoming more machine readable. But the thing is, I am not just interested in data. I think a lot of people, I've worked as a programmer, a lot of us who do work with data, you usually work with it at the point at which you get a large data set, and then you do something with it. And a lot of your work has to do with how you make sense of that data set after you have it. But a lot of my work kind of starts before that point. I'm far more interested in this. I'm interested in the process of how you actually collect a data set. And I'm interested in that because I think that by looking at that moment, you start to be able to peel apart some of these other questions, some of these really kind of interesting questions to me that have to do, again, with these more socio-technical considerations. But I was not always interested in data collection, so I kind of want to walk you through what even made me get to this point. And like I said, I'm going to show you some work. I'm going to try to like think through these Google Maps examples by looking at some past work of mine. And so I'm going to start with this one, which is not really an artwork, it's more of an intervention, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But first, I have to set the stage. So this is a project from 2013, like I said, it's more of an intervention than an actual piece. And the background is that I was living in Brooklyn, as I do now. It was summer, it was very hot, and I was getting catcalled a lot. So I assume maybe, in the US, we act like things in Canada are just so much better than how they are here, but I assume that you all know what catcalling is. I'm sure you have experienced, maybe some of you have experienced that. So for me, the thing that was really stood out about this experience of walking down the street and getting catcalled a lot is that I often was not sure of how to respond. And often somebody would say something pretty grotesque on my body that I really didn't like, but I felt kind of frozen. And I was like, I don't know what to do. And because of the kind of work I do, I thought, well, actually, this is a really good opportunity to maybe leverage the distancing effects of some forms of technology. So what I started doing over the summer is anytime somebody catcalled me, I would walk up to them and I would give them a piece of paper that had a phone number on it. They assumed that it was my phone number, but what they didn't know is that I had actually set the phone number to be hooked up to a server so that whenever you texted it, you would get a string of pre-programmed messages. So this is, this is like 2013. So this is bot days. So you would get this string of pre-programmed messages. It was pretty random which one you would get, but I'll show you an example of what this interaction would be like. So you have to imagine I'm walking down the street, somebody says something, I stop, I turn around, I give them this piece of paper that has my phone number. They text me. I set it up so you couldn't call. It said the voice box was full. So you had to text. So then they text something like this, which says, "Hi, gorgeous, beautiful day isn't," I think the "it" is implied. And so keep in mind, this is 2013. I told you this is like my early days, and this is one of the strings of messages that you could get. And it was the most intense one. It said, "I wish you knew how terrible your actions make me feel." So this is the one that this person got in response. And here's how they responded to me. "My apologies. What should I take a look at? And it won't happen again." So I share this one because this is the only nice message I ever got. That's why I share it. All the rest were way, way worse, more like people cursing me out or being really upset. So I did this project over the course of an entire summer. I probably handed these out to about 15 people. And by the end of the summer, I had something that was kind of like this. This is not the real thing. This is just me. I didn't want to actually put it there, but you can guess. I had this data set of all the people who had catcalled me. So this was really interesting to me because this wasn't what I had set out to actually create, but it was nonetheless this thing I had. And from this point, I had a lot of conversations with people. And so this is the point, like when you're working on an artwork, this is like the climax. This is like, what do you do? Now you have this thing, got all these people who have catcalled you. And I talked to a lot of people. A lot of friends were like, oh, you should text them bell hooks quotes, or you should sign them up for some sort of service, do whatever. And in the end, I thought about it. And what I ended up doing with this was actually nothing. Did nothing at all. And the reason I did nothing is because I could not get away from this fact that once I had actually accidentally created this data set of all my catcallers, all of a sudden the artifact of that data set was more important than the process that went into it. And so anytime I talked to people, they really wanted to know what I was going to do with this data set, what I was going to do with all these phone numbers. And to me, that really obscured everything, like the threat that I felt in walking up to these people who I didn't know and handing them the phone number, and this like weird relationship that we had where it felt like we were texting each other, but really we weren't. All of that to me was super important, and I saw so easily how having that artifact, that data set, made it really easy to ignore the process and that relationship that was inherent within it. So, relationship and process. So this is the moment where I started getting really interested in data collection. It was from really that project where I was like, okay, well, there's something happening here. The thing that seems like, the thing that stands out the most to me is the part that seems like it's least talked about. So I started really wanting to investigate this. And it started to make me realize that this question of how you actually collect something is so important, is so important. It can determine so much more. So for example, these are two numbers. First one says 5,796. Second one says 293,800. These are both numbers for the number of hate crimes that happened in the US in 2013. Same year. Clearly, these are two vastly different numbers. Why? That's the question, why? And the answer is that they are collected in two different ways by two different agencies. So the first number comes from the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting. Is that right? Yeah, I think it's from the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Survey. Yes, so that's the survey that they get from, they actually get this information by going to police stations. So they ask law enforcement agents, how many hate crimes have they actually investigated over the course of a year? That's going to tell you 5,796. In the US, we also have the Bureau of Justice of Statistics, and they actually send out a survey that goes to people who have experienced hate crimes. So it says anybody can do it. If you report, you can self-report. That's how you get this number, 293,800. Clearly, these are two different numbers. This is just an example that really illustrates this point. How you collect a data set absolutely determines what it means and what it's going to look like. And it's important to highlight this because once you have that data set, it doesn't really matter. You can just tell people, this is how we collected it, these are the ways, blah, blah, blah. Once it's there, that process of how you collected it starts to kind of disappear. So these two numbers, these came from a piece that I wrote in 2016, wrote a few years ago, where I was really trying to tease apart some of these ideas of what it means, data collection, a lot of the things that I'm talking to you about right now. And I came up, that was one of the points, those numbers, the reason I used that one to show you here, it's one of the points from this piece. Another thing that came from this piece is this idea, that as we collect more data, we prioritize things that fit patterns of collection. And what I'm trying to get at here is this idea that if you have a world in which it is important and it's valuable for things to be made into data, then all of a sudden you will really prioritize things that are in the form of data. It makes sense. It's like quite cyclical. And as you have a world that is increasingly based on automation, well then obviously you're going to prioritize things that can fit into that model. But then, to me, the question becomes, well, what about the things that don't fit in that? And so from this point, started working on a project that been working on now for, I don't know, for a number of years in a lot of different forms. And it's a project called Missing Datasets. It's sort of the broad name for the entire thing. And the whole project is about this idea of what are the things that we don't collect? What does it mean to not be able to have data about something? And this started out as a repository on GitHub. For any of you who use GitHub, it's a code sharing site. And for any of you who don't use GitHub, it's a site for sharing your code. I pretty much like to use it for sharing anything but code if I can. So I like to kind of put things out there just on GitHub and kind of let them live and then sort of start to do something with them. So I started out this project by writing about just some of my thoughts on missing data sets. And for me, the way that I categorize a missing data set is that it is a blank spot that exists in a space that's otherwise data saturated. So what will happen is that you'll see there are these kind of social spaces where we collect a lot of data, and then at the same time, in those same spaces, you will see that there's something that's not being collected. So here is, and this is a list of a bunch of different missing data sets. This is a pretty old list. Some of these are not missing anymore, which I'll kind of talk about in a second. But so I started this project just by collecting lots and lots of missing data sets. What are the things that we aren't collecting? What are the things that are missing? But then I started doing this, but I pretty quickly stopped because I started to realize that what I was doing was fetishizing the data sets instead of the process, which is literally what so much of my work had been about before, this idea of focusing on the process, not just the artifacts. And so instead of focusing on the actual missing data sets, I started to think to myself about what causes that. So what are the patterns of absence? What are the things that make it so that we don't have data about certain things? And after spending a lot of time kind of thinking and working with various groups, kind of came up with 4 main reasons why you have missing data sets. 4 reasons why things don't exist, why this data doesn't exist. The first is this, it's that those who have the resources to collect a data set often lack the incentive, and usually vice versa. So the example that's really good that I like to use for this is the one that really started me working on this project, which is civilians in the US who have been killed by the police. So now this is no longer a missing data set, but for a long time it was. We didn't have any kind of centralized repository that had this information. And the thing is, it actually wouldn't be too difficult to have a very easy and pretty rigorous data set about this, but it would require law enforcement agents to collect that. And there is no incentive. There's no incentive for police to collect that information. On the other hand, there's a lot of incentive for journalists, for civilians, for people who have family members who have been killed by police. There's a lot of incentive for various members of the public to be able to collect this, to be able to have that data, but it's very difficult for them to. So now this is no longer a missing data set, but that is really due to the work of a ton of different groups, a ton of different individuals and activist groups and organizers and journalists working together to try to collect that. But again, this imbalance between resources and incentives. The second reason why you will often have missing data sets is that the act of collection can sometimes take more than what it actually gives you. And the example that I use for this a lot has to do with sexual harassment. And there are certain spaces in which it's really difficult to collect some information around sexual assault and sexual harassment, particularly because of the cost that it takes to come forward and talk about this. This is why I think it's so important for us to highlight this process, the process by which you get data. that sometimes the act of actually coming forward, presenting that isn't worth just having the data set. The cost for one individual might not be worth them coming forward and talking about it. Might not be worth actually having that exist. This third one is, I think, really interesting. It's one that it's just quite fun. We're fun in a way. It's that sometimes data just resists metrification. So there are some things that just resist the forms that we have of actually quantifying information. And it can happen in really interesting ways. So the example that I really like to use is cash, because it is not something that you would think fits this at all, but had loads and loads of conversations with various economists working for the government. It's a long story, we can talk about it in the question and answer, but I've had loads of conversations with people about this question of trying to track how much cash, how much US dollars outside of the borders of the USA, and how they try to model this problem away. There are lots of papers about this, but this is really difficult because cash is sort of this anonymous form. When you compare that to credit cards are really great in a world in which data is money, because you can track everything. You can track every transaction. So it makes sense for a lot of businesses to want to move to credit card transactions, but cash kind of eludes that in a way. And then this last one is, in some ways, I think the trickiest of the four, because it says that sometimes there are just benefits to a data set not existing. And the reason why I say this is tricky is that actually in any case where there's a missing data set, it's benefiting somebody that it's not there. But usually it's benefiting the people who have more power in that situation. But sometimes there are situations where people who actually are like situationally disadvantaged, they're the ones who say, no, we don't want this to exist. And a good example for this is worked with some undocumented immigrants in the US, in New York City, and working in the restaurant business. And what we were trying to do was kind of work together to think about the fact that they knew that they were being underpaid, they knew that they were being exploited. And so as we were kind of thinking through this, in the end, some people in the group stood up and were like, you know what, we don't want to do anything. We actually would rather not go public with this. We don't want anything to exist because we think that in the short term, like we might lose something from this, rather than, even though we know that in the long term, this could help us. Sometimes there are benefits for groups to non-existence. Bless you. So this missing data sets project has a lot of different parts to it. One part of it is just research, which I've sort of told you about before. But there is this part of it that involves just me working with lots of groups who feel like they are missing data. And so I want to share one of those stories with you. So this is a group of Asian-American performers on Broadway. Anybody a Broadway person? No one ever admits it. Yes, exactly. Great. Okay, well, this is a story about Broadway. So these are performers. They all perform on Broadway and off-Broadway stages. And they're part of the Asian-American Performing Arts Coalition, I think. So they all perform on Broadway stages. What they started to realize is that they felt that they were not getting roles at the same rate as some of their counterparts. And they thought, well, actually, I guess there's a way that we could try to figure this out. We could just ask, like, what is the ethnicity and what are the races of the people who get roles on Broadway stages? So they tried to collect this data set. It turns out this was a missing data set. This did not exist. So they went to a bunch of different groups. They started collecting this on their own. I joined them maybe like years, honestly, in their process. They had already done a lot of this. And I just joined them to help them think about what it meant to collect it, to do some of the data analysis around it, and kind of help them like bring it all together and bring a frame for it. They did really the bulk of the work with all of this. But we started to realize that we went to various different stakeholders in the theater world in New York. People said that they could not collect this data because it would be unreliable. But then we realized that there is a lot of data collected about audience demographics. So apparently that is reliable. So anyway, we worked together for a long time. We were able to collect this. And then at the end, wrote this article. We did this like huge event. We wrote this article about some of the results. So let me show you. We had a lot in this article. We talk all about it. They had collected the data. It was a really great kind of situation because they actually knew a lot of the people on Broadway. So it was one of those moments where they could collect it, but it felt like a pretty whole data set. And so we put a lot of different charts. We talked a lot about this, but there's really just one chart I'm going to show you for the sake of time, but it kind of gets this across. So you can see, this is a chart. It has the race and ethnicity of different actors on Broadway for Broadway shows. This is new shows, 2014, 2015. The light blue color Asian-American performers. You will see they're pretty much only in one show. It's The King and I. Takes place in modern-day Thailand. They're not the main characters. So we had many more charts that went more into detail about actually how we did this. But you can kind of see that they were able to prove the point that they had from the beginning. Their point was like, hey, we don't think we're getting enough roles at the same rate of other counterparts. And from collecting that, we were able to show like actually they weren't. So this is nice. It was like a very nice, a very neat missing data kind of story, because it's like we were missing something, now we were able to collect it, now we have it, now we can do something. It was very inspiring. But so much of this project is not really about just when things work out really easily. And so I have this third part of the project, which is really an art piece, and it's meant to allow for some of the moments where it's not quite so neat. So this is called the Library of Missing Datasets, an installation piece. What the form it really takes is it's this white filing cabinet, and inside of it are missing datasets. So inside of it are folders. Each of them is titled with the name of a different missing dataset. So each of these folders is empty. It's really great. Something I like is that sometimes I show this in places where people can actually interact with the piece, and it's just a great experience watching people like lift up a folder and then open it, and then they're like, oh yeah, right, it's missing, it's empty, I get it. And it's really nice because it allows us to be able to see that. And something else, part of the reason why I've done it in this form is that it really gets across, like I said, I don't want to just fetishize the idea of all this data being missing. The point of this project is not to collect every data set, and it's not to identify all of the missing data sets that exist. Rather, it's to point to this, what does it mean for us to think of the world in the form of data, and what do we miss by that? What do we lose? Is there something that we lose? And it's really meant to kind of point at those questions. Yeah, great. Yes, and then, so this, I think I said it, I don't know if I said this at the beginning. A way that I like to work is that I often make pieces multiple times. I sometimes say that this is like me releasing different versions of pieces, but often it's because I want to try a piece again, try an artwork again, but try to think through it in a different way, or try to bring up another aspect of it that maybe couldn't see before, or that maybe a new thing that I'm thinking about. And so in January of this year, I showed this piece in another show. It's in the show called A Recounting Data Disinformation in Black Experience. And it was meant to be specifically about data related to Blackness, mostly in the context of the US. And I showed pretty much a very similar version of this piece, except that it's gold. What I really wanted to get at here is this question of relationship and collection. In the US, there's a lot of data about Black people that is not in the hands of Black people. And so I wanted to use this goal to kind of get at that idea of wealth extraction, and what does that mean? Or rather just extraction, which has come up before, which I mentioned earlier. And this is something I really liked about this piece. A lot of the data sets inside of it relate specifically to Blackness. However, this is something, for this exact showing of it, the other thing I do whenever I show this piece, or when I show any of these other pieces, wherever I show them, I try to make the data sets relate to where it is. So if I'm showing it here in Montreal, it'll be around missing data, specifically like to Canada, or when I've shown the piece in Amsterdam, try to make it specifically about there. And so this one was trying to say, well, okay, well, what if we look at this for a particular group? How does that change it? How does that change how we think about it? And something that the Missing Data Project always kind of gets me thinking about is this point that I was trying to tease out earlier, this idea of relationship inherent in data collection. For any kind of data set, I like to think of this relationship in terms of there's a group who wants to collect something, and then there's a group who often makes up the collected. And a lot of times, that relationship is really clear. You can see that really easily, but a lot of times it isn't. And so a lot of what I'm trying to do in my work is tease out, okay, well, how can we make that clear? What does it look like? What does it look like if we bring that back into this? And this question of, from working on the Missing Dataset project, it got me really thinking about groups, about us, about we, about who is in control, who has the terms, who actually gets to control this information, who has access to it. This comes up because people often ask me, how do you find missing data sets? Like, what's your process for this? And the truth is, it's not that hard. People pretty much reach out to me all the time saying, like, we're missing this data set. Because any group that is missing information is pretty aware of what they're missing. That's the thing, like they know that. And this is why I told you I now have come to this point where I really think about the particular groups, particular people who are behind these things, who is at the center of this. So something that I've been moving towards a lot more in my work is thinking about the ways in which this idea of this we that's at the center when we think about a data collection, when we think about this relationship, and thinking about the ways how you can understand people in terms of data, how people are constituted through data, and how sometimes that can be a process that is very empowering, and sometimes it can be a little bit odd. For example, okay, this is a list of a lot of things. Can y'all read this at all? No, can you not? Yes? Yeah, cool. Okay, can anybody guess what this is? Who said that? Marketing? Yes, well done. Nice. Spoken like someone who works in the field. So this is scraped by Sam Levine, who's this media artist who's working at University of Texas, Austin. And this is from Twitter's ad creation page. And he scraped here all of the different categories that people are sorted into for advertising purposes. So you can see this. I like this. You can see this because there's a difference between buyers of cheese and then buyers of dairy products and eggs, and then buyers of milk. You can see like people who live within like close to a CVS drugstore versus a Rite Aid drugstore versus a whatever. There's like another drugstore that's on here. So this is just good. It's a good example because it speaks to this business model of the web and so on, and it speaks to how data and digital platforms can constitute or form us into groups without us knowing. And it speaks to this idea of how people are classified. People are classified by data. And this is, which is for me very interesting because it's been the topic of some of the more recent stuff I've been working on, which, as I said, has to do more with people and how we like relate in groups to data sets. And so I'll show you some more work. I'll start with this. This is a photo of my mom. And this is a photo of all the people who look like my mom, apparently. So this is from a recent piece that I've done. This is from a piece called Us Aggregated. And the whole idea of this is to use Google's reverse image search algorithms and to try to look at the ways in which we are grouped, the ways in which we are seen as similar. And so this project here is specifically looking at this idea of something very banal. So Google's image search recognition algorithms it's great, we're here at Element AI. They use a machine learning system to kind of tag to see what's in the photo and then present you with the world, photos from the web that are similar. And what was just interesting about this to me was just this, again, I find myself very intrigued by this idea of data and the ways in which data constitute people, people being grouped in different forms, and what it means to be grouped like this. And again, how this seems very banal, but in fact, it takes a kind of power to tell people what they are similar to. There's a power in being like, this is what you are like, this is who you are like. And so this is this entire piece. It's called Us Aggregated. This is just a short version of it, and it's this video, and it takes photos from my family's own personal collection. And then I wrote a script that would allow me to be able to scrape all of the photos that have been tagged as similar. And so it's a website. This is a much shorter version of it. It's really like a 15 minute video. This is just a sample of it. And what I'm trying to peel apart here is many things. So there are some things here about the ways that the algorithms don't work. You'll see here, you can actually see what they're tagged with. So I told you there's a machine learning system that actually looks at the image first, tags it, and then returns similar photos, which is different than other reverse image services, because most of those ones won't actually tag. They will just try to look at the pixels and determine. But you can see, like, this is our family sitting on a stone hippo. Google tags that as an animal. It's not a real animal, of course, it's a fake one. So there's something in like, seeing the ways in which algorithms don't always work. But I am mostly interested in, again, just these models that classify us and what it means for us to be grouped by them. And what it means for us to not even think about the ways in which we're increasingly being grouped and seen by these digital platforms. This idea of classification is really at the heart of a lot of the recent work that I've done. And I think partly this is because even to come back to here, there's a power in being able to say how the world should be rendered. There's a power in being able to group people in any kind of way. And that's one that Google's engineers have, whether they kind of realize it or not. This is another recent piece. This one is called, and I tried to really tease it out in this piece. This actually is a piece that I worked out when I was here in Montreal at Studio XX. And this is called Classification 01. It's 2 brackets and a camera in the middle. And it's neon. And it's lit up pretty much the whole time. But what the piece is doing is kind of reading whoever comes in. And if it likes you, if it thinks that the people who are standing in front of it are similar, then the brackets will turn on or they'll turn off, depending on which exhibition it's in. So the brackets will change depending on if they decide that you're similar. So sometimes they'll turn on to say, look, all of you are grouped. You're grouped within these brackets. And then a part of this, or in other cases, they will turn off. And part of this is about what it means to be this idea of looking at an art piece and changing it to this interaction of not knowing the terms for how you are being seen, which is actually this very normal act that happens to all of us nowadays. This unsatisfactory feeling, the strange discomfort with the piece turns off after you've been standing in front of it. And I think what I'm trying to really get at here is this banal logic that is inherent in a lot of today's online platforms, where the users are really quietly tagged and classified by these systems, but are really told the terms for those classifications. So they don't share the code behind it, they don't share the rationale behind it, and you're just kind of left with this feeling of what it means to have been grouped in whatever way. And it's really about that strange emptiness of that process. So what I'm thinking through here is that there's this question of power that is involved, but that this power of grouping is productive and that it has these effects. And that power is part of this question of who counts and who's included and who gets to determine how groups are formed or what is deemed as satisfactory. And now I think in kind of going through those projects, I want to come back now to the beginning and sort of tell you how I think through a lot of these sites that are on Google Maps. So a lot of these sites, these are sites that don't really count as data. And they don't count as data because of the way in which geographic data is created, which is based on a certain conception of what spaces are and what spaces should look like. There's a way we can, so none of these systems are really legible to any of our systems of data collection. Part of that could be because they're too remote. Some of them lack a certain kind of infrastructure. Some of them are impermanent, some of them are informal, but at the end of the day, they all resist categorization. And it's not that this is really just Google's fault, but rather it's that there's this question of legibility that is lost here. And it tells us something about the way that geographic data collection is done today. It is based on a certain idea of what spaces are and what they should look like. And this has ramifications. It has ramifications, particularly in this world, and this is where I'm going to try to tie it back to AI. And I'm going to come back to this example of the favela. So this has these ramifications that have to do with power. And particularly, the way I'll tie this back is I told you the favelas were my kind of favorite example of these spaces. The reason for that is because of the way that I found out about these these blank spots on the map. And it's through this. This is an article in one of the largest newspapers in Sao Paulo. And it talks about how when Pokemon Go first came out, I hope you all remember Pokemon Go. It was like this AR game. When Pokemon Go first came out, nobody in the favelas could play. And the reason for this is because Niantic, the company that made Pokemon Go, was incubated within Google. They used Google's Maps as the baseline for Pokemon Go. And so when the app first came out, if you didn't show up on Google's Maps, then obviously you're not going to show up within the game. So nobody in the favelas could play. And this to me was just, it's really interesting because it feels like it's very banal. It feels like it doesn't matter. It feels like it's just a game. But in fact, this Ronaldo Lemos, this academic who's based in Brazil, wrote this long article about this. And he talked about how not just, if you can't play Pokemon Go, it's not just about that. Obviously, things like self-driving cars, you're not going to be able to get. You're illegible to a lot of other systems as well. And so this is one way of understanding it in kind of a frivolous and trivial way. But actually, it kind of allows us to see the ramifications of what it means to not show up or to be not to be missed and what that looks like. So actually, so to me, this gets at a lot of these questions that I told you I've been quite interested in, these questions about how the things like the data that we see, the way that we collect data actually has all these social ramifications. But in fact, that is like a lot of old work. It's not really the stuff I've been working on now. I feel like I needed to do a lot of that work so that I could understand and like have a foundation to be able to create a lot of new things. And so what I want to do is, with the last few minutes, I actually don't know how much time there is, but with these last few minutes, I just want to show you one newer project I've been working on, which maybe ties more into some of those things brought up at the beginning. So this is me, obviously, and this is Diana Nucera. Diana and I are collaborators. We've worked on a few projects together. We worked on one main project together that I'm going to tell you about. And Diana and I met because we were at a lot of events that had to do with ethical AI. And we were at a lot of events that had to do with how different people were being impacted by AI systems. And I've told you a little bit about my work, so maybe you'll see that there's a big part of my practice that involves working with people who are affected by various technological systems or by emerging technology, but then don't necessarily know exactly what they want to do with that. Diana's work is even more so in this camp. Diana works in Detroit. In Detroit, 40% of people don't have access to the internet. And so a lot of Diana's work is actually in building like self-standing kind of like mesh networks so that people who aren't connected to the internet can become connected to it. And Diana and I met at a lot of these events, and what we found ourselves asking is, as we're talking about these like even new like emerging technology, things like AI, things like machine learning, how do we talk about this to people who don't have access to the internet? How do you even have this conversation? And how do we do it in a way that feels like it's embedded within a lot of the issues that those people might be facing? And so we ended up making this. This is called A People's Guide to Artificial Intelligence. It's a zine. Zine is like a DIY self-published booklet, for anyone who doesn't know. And it is a comprehensive beginner's guide to understanding AI and other data-driven systems. It uses this popular education approach to explore and explain AI-based technology so that everyone, from youth to seniors and from non-techies to experts, has a chance to think critically about the kinds of futures automated technologies can bring. And with this, Diana and I were really interested in this idea that I've sort of brought up in like the second half of this about groups and about people, like thinking specifically about technology emerging for particular groups. We both were very against the idea of just scale and that everybody's treated equally, or we're not against everyone being treated equally, but we're against the idea that one piece of technology can be used for everyone. And we both have found ourselves working with people who often are in the edge cases, people who are left out when things are designed for a mythical middle, a mythical like body. And so we really made this zine for them. And to do that, we thought that we were like, okay, we want to create this thing, but we want it to be very grounded in like social practice and also in social realities. And so we started with a glossary of terms where we thought it's important to include things like racial equity and inequity and consciousness next to marginalized communities, next to robot, next to nature, next to AI. We also realized how difficult it is to talk about some of this stuff. And so we did a lot of work of saying, okay, well, where actually do you find these systems? What does it look like? What does it mean? Like, what is this word AI actually doing for us? We broke down some of these, like we thought, what is an algorithm? We tried to break down what these terms actually mean. We had cats because we both like them. That's it. No, not really. Part of it was just that we really were pushing against the ways in which we see a lot of technology being talked about. And so we wanted to create something that was really friendly, really inviting. And we made it this workbook style, because we know that people learn in different ways. So some people like to read a thing, some people like to actually fill out a thing. And so we made it so that you could use the guide in various ways. You could read through it, or you can just skip to like different workbook exercises if that's what you're interested in. But then we also were like, we think we can cover all of these things in one book. And so we made sure that we went pretty in depth technically in talking about differences between AI and machine learning and talking about what's at the heart of a lot of these technologies. And then of course, we ended on this note of equity. And part of this is because in the spaces that we found ourselves in, Diana and I, we often hear people talking about things like artificial intelligence in a way that is really kind of full of fear, and talking about all of the terrible things these things can do, talking about things like predictive policing, where you're predicting where you think crime is going to happen, which often ends up affecting marginalized communities. Specifically, we find ourselves in these places where the tone ends in a kind of dystopic way. And so we thought it was important to actually end on this note of equity and access, and like what can we do? What can we do? What does it mean to read this, and what can you do from here? So that is the same note I'm going to leave this on. That's it. Thank you. questions for 15 minutes? Cool. If people have, yeah. Okay, I'll repeat the question. You said you want me to make recommendations on how we can use data responsibly to.
So recommendations about how to use data responsibly in a way that helps people decolonize.
Right. Okay, so that is a really good question. I'm really glad you asked it. I would start by saying that in general, I think it can be hard to make large blanket statements about all of this because of so much of the stuff that I've been thinking about, which is the specificities. However, but I do have something for you. I was gonna get there, don't worry. Yeah, so overall, I don't like to say blanket statements for all of this, but there are a lot of groups who have been working to think about what does it mean to use data responsibly, and they've come up with different like principles. One of them is data minimization, collect the least data that you can. Another one is actually how long the data actually lives. Don't collect things forever. Have like an end line for when, like have a point where you're going to get rid of this, because so much, I don't know if I said this, but part of the reason why I like to focus so much on the process is that once you have a data set, you do whatever you want with it. And then it can be used for anything. And that can end up really harming people. Letting people know like what the reason is that you're collecting it and what it will be used for, that makes a big difference. Something else I really like, there are these groups, the Detroit Community Technology Project does this, where if you're going to come and work with them, if you're going to work with any of the people there, you have to sign, like they make you sign a form. They're like, we want to know what you're doing, why you're using this, what data you're collecting, how long are you going to have it? And we will decide whether we are okay with this or not. So it's like a community that's kind of hyper-local community that's come together and said, we are going to be like the stewards of this. We're really interested in owning this. We're interested in knowing exactly how this is used. And we make sure you have to talk about it in a way that's very accessible so that we get where you're going with this. So those are some.
Yeah, Mimi, you had mentioned that Google had worked with the various NGOs to map the favelas, including Morro das Prazeres.
Yeah.
So why it was not implemented?
It's not that they didn't, they really tried to. However, it's just extremely, extremely difficult. Favelas are just, they built actually special technology to try to map the favelas. And it was extremely time intensive and cost intensive. And at the end of the day, they were like, we don't actually know if this is it's worth as much as we're putting into it. That's pretty much where it ended up. So it's not that people didn't try, it's just that they were like, this doesn't scale for us. It doesn't make sense. There are, like I said, there are nonprofits who do work with people in the favelas and who are trying to, create maps. There's, I forget the name of a really good one that's working in Rio right now, I forget their name, but they've done a lot of things in working with people. But also there's just a lot of people who are cut off from being mapped on these digital systems. They're also cut off from existing governmental and social infrastructure already. So a lot of people in the particular favelas I was talking about, they don't have street addresses either. You know, it's the same things leveled on top of each other. It's just that when you add this layer of emerging technology, then it amplifies everything that's going on and it feeds into more systems. I'm gonna get this and then.
Hi, my name's Derek.
Hi, Derek.
I was wondering if you hadn't done any work on misclassification of data. So for example, people being classified incorrectly and how that might impact them. Where I'm getting at is kind of like saying, mostly towards like marketing or something like that, where you might be classified as someone who wants to spend, is going to go on a trip to like Europe, willing to buy plane tickets or something like that. But what if you're misclassified and you're really just like a compulsive spender instead of that, a person that really wants to go on a trip? So those kind of things that I'm wondering about.
So you said you're wondering about misclassification. Oh, like as in what the effects can be for people, or
if you had any work on that domain misclassification, or if you have any thoughts on that.
That's an interesting question. Let me see, what's a good example of talking misclassification?
Can I add a part to that question too? Especially for thinking about gender and like if you're being read as like someone not your gender,
Right.
your gender non-binary,
Oh,
what
yeah.
that means for classification too.
Do you say you wanted to answer or extend?
I was wondering
Yeah,
if you could
well, I
also-
think,
I wanted to add to part of
I
the
think
question too.
the work of Sasha, do you know Sasha? I'm forgetting her last name. Thank you, Sasha Costanza-Chalk. Thank you. Yeah, Sasha's work is really great for this because Sasha is a trans woman and she talks a lot about what it means to go through the airport, to go through these systems, and to be read by them and to be like unclassifiable, basically, and what the actual impact of that is for her and for loads of other people like her. In fact, I would actually just recommend going, and she talks about this a lot. And the way that that's kind of manifests for her is that she's worked with a team, a number of different teams who came out of the Allied Media Conference, and they've done a ton of work around like design justice. And they think about this in the context of design and how you're actually designing those systems. And then they have this list of principles that they've created to say, this is how you create, like, this is what design justice looks like in practice. So I would say go to, yeah, some of her stuff is just really good about this because she talks exactly about what you're talking about. This material, this actual experience, particularly as a queer person, to be like misclassified in a way that is so integral to her personality as a trans person. So her stuff is really good about that. Say go to her. And you were
yeah, thank you so much for your talk. It was wonderful. I'm wondering about the process of making art and well, I mean, if you want to share like what got you into that, then that's definitely interesting. But I'm kind of also wondering about like, what did that then feed back into your academic work? Like, what did you get from taking on those modalities that fed back into your work?
That's such a good question. I really like that. I think I feel like I live in a lot of different worlds. And so one of them is, there's one world that is like very much about creating art. Sometimes I'm like in the classroom teaching, other times I'm, I don't know, somewhere else. And something I've often thought about is that in all these, or writing, like I've worked as a journalist, I've done that. All of these are like different ways of expressing a similar field of inquiry. I often think about that, but that they all do it in different ways. And what I really like about using the space of art is that I feel like there's something more explorative, and I feel like I can get at some of the feelings of things without having to just have the answers all the time. So sometimes I feel like when I have to write a piece, it's very much like I have to say, okay, well, this is what we're doing, this is what it means, this is whatever. But often what I like about being able to create art pieces is saying like, there's something just interesting here, or I feel weird about this, and I just want to like tease that out a bit. Let me just create a thing that like people can stand in front of and see if they feel that too. And maybe then we can connect over that and I can try to use that for something else. Is that answering your question? I don't know. Yeah, so I think I like working across those different fields and having them feed back into each other. I think just allows me to think in some ways more, for me, like more widely about a lot of these topics. And some of, I haven't talking about some older work, not really talking about some newer stuff, but something I have found from that process of like moving between worlds is also this like building a tolerance for the uncertainty and not knowing the answers of things, and like allowing that to come up, like allowing that to be a process and a place that I get to. That sounds quite abstract, but yeah, I think for me it's really useful to be able to sometimes have spaces where I'm like, oh, this is more of an artwork. There's an aspect of it that I can't quite pin down, but that is nonetheless just as compelling and just also like a form of cultural critique or a form of research knowledge production, just as much as like writing more of an academic paper. All right.
So I'm just curious, out of all of the missing data sets that you've been curating, I know it's not an artifact that you care about, but which of all of them has been the one that you would most like to have?
Ooh, that I would most like to have.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's really hard. Let me see. I think in some ways, let me see. Oh, that's so good. No one has ever asked me that. never even thought about. Which one would I most want to have? So I feel some sort of attachment to one that, okay, this sort of answers your question. It doesn't quite. But I feel some sort of attachment to this, the one that first got me into this, which was civilians killed by the police in the US, because now it's not a missing data set, but even though it's not a missing data set, it's still a problem that's happening. And so it's not that I like it, but what it is it's a really useful reminder to me that this is like the first step of a much larger process. There's much, that just because you collect them doesn't mean anything actually. Like it means something, it means you have it, but it doesn't, like that, it's not really a chance to really pat myself on the back and be like, great, we got this, now we're done. That like, great, now we do know how many civilians in the US are killed by the police every year. They're still being killed, there's more to this. So I think that one has a weird special place in my heart. It sounds so weird, it's hard to talk about. But yeah, that one means something special to me because I feel like I've seen it go through this huge process where it was like, this was missing, a bunch of people like done this work, talked with all those people, now it's here and it was a celebration. And then we were like, oh, okay. And it kind of feels like it mirrors like how in general a lot of activism is, where you're like, we've done a thing, there's still so much to go, but this is still really cool. But this still counts as something. So there's that one. And then I had one of my, so there's this one like really trivial missing data set. One of my friends was like, I had this conversation with someone who was like, you should also be, like when I think about missing data, I think not just in terms of what like we can't count, but also things that are just not available to the public. So sometimes there's a missing data set about like when the Foreign Surveillance Court in the US meets, or like stingrays. I don't know if I talked about that. The number of stingrays that police departments use, which are like imitation cell phone towers so that they can get metadata from civilians' phones. He was like, yeah, there are those, but then there are also things that just like, how would you even know? He was like, magicians in corporate spaces, like I really want that. That's a missing, you should put that on there. So sometimes I really like the sillier ones too, because it can be a really heavy project. So it's fun to be like, oh, okay, different levels of what's missing. There are some that have like very real activists and like organizing ramifications, and there are some where you're like, lots of things are missing. That's okay. So I don't know if that's my favorite. Yeah. Or maybe some of the ones, ooh, sorry, now you've got me like thinking. Okay, some of the ones about undocumented people. I really like, there's a lot of sanctuary cities in the US that don't collect data about when undocumented people get municipal IDs, which I love, because then when like the government tries to come down and be like, yo, we want that data set, they're like, we don't have it. So those are my favorite. My favorite are the ones where people are using obfuscation in a way that actually gives them power. Sorry, I had to think through that, but thanks.
So thank you for holding the uncomfortable space for the unknown and pointing out what is missing. This question is going to seem a little bit weird because I'm coming from the water policy space. So as a layperson, I at least know the basic. The models are only as good as the data that you collect. And there's a lot of effort now going into discovering new decision support systems and predicting where there's going to be water insecurity and water conflicts. And I'm thinking, how can models be designed to hold space for this unknown as well, to capture something that might be inequitable, to not replicate power dynamics that we know are flawed, because we want to be doing a little bit more perhaps foresight rather than forecasting, which is just building off of inequities from the past using the old data as well. So jumbling a few questions in here, but.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is if we had that answer, everything would be great. Like that's the question that everybody wants to answer, that exact one, which is really good. But that, like what can we do? It's as good as the data that we have, but the data that we have is necessarily always flawed. This is why I think, so I have a number of different answers. First is that this is why I think, again, not fetishizing the data that we have is so important, because it is often quite flawed. But then I work with some statisticians, specifically the Human Rights Data Analysis Group. We're really doing a lot of cool work. And they talk a lot about how you have to, the whole point of statistics is trying to be able to model this away, but there is still a lot of uncertainty within the space. And a thing that they often say that they wish that they had more of was a way to be able to communicate and visualize that uncertainty more easily. So it kind of comes back to the very beginning of what you were saying, holding space for that. And in fact, the way that I really met the group was that they were like, we have to release this information, but there's this much uncertainty and we want to be able to show it. And we don't know a great way to visualize when we don't know something in a way that people will see just as much as when you visualize the things that we do know. And I'll give one little tangent because there is one example of this, like visualizing uncertainty, that often comes up in this space that I think maybe is tied to this, which is if you use, any of you have ever used your Google's Maps on your phone, you use the Google Map, the app, Google Maps, when you're first somewhere, there's a blue dot that signifies where you are, but then there's this circle, right? There's like this kind of transparent circle, which actually signifies all the different places that you could be. And then it's like, as it zeroes down and it becomes smaller once it's like, okay, we do know exactly where you are. So this one little feature, yeah. Yeah, there's a whole, I mean, loads of people are trying to do this. There's this whole group called the Fairness, somebody help me, FATML, but what does it stand for? Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency? There's it, Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency. A lot of the work that they do, it's a lot of computer scientists who are really interested in the intersection of these issues. So there's like a group of them who are working on a book about this. They've worked with AI now, Meredith Whitaker, who's coming, they've worked with, some of them have worked with them to come up with a whole book around this. The pushback that they often get is from social scientists who say, you're trying to, that if we just focus on how unfair a data set is, then it allows us to pretend like it's removed from the rest of the world. And then it makes it so that we can create metrics to make a data set more or less fair, but we're not actually fixing the underlying conditions that they're tied to. That's the debate around that right now. So people are trying to do it, but this is the back and forth. And I don't think, I think both of those things are true. Not or, it's really and. They both are.
For maybe one more question.
Oh, can we do two? Because you had your hand up and I kept forgetting.
Oh,
so
yeah,
we'll do
2 more questions.
Yeah.
Just a quick question about the maps, like for the favelas and those other places. Are the people living in those spaces perhaps actively hostile to being mapped? Because you sort of alluded to that in your 4 points about, I forget how you put it, resistance, yeah.
Yeah, so I can't really speak for all of these different people, obviously. I can only speak for the ones who I've talked to, and I would say some yes and some no, but it depends. I think there are some people, so I told you I've been to Makoko and then also to one of particular favelas in Rio. And there are a lot of people who were saying, actually, it would be really helpful. You know, when they did show up in Pokemon Go, they were like, this is great. When we can play this, actually, it's really convenient to be tied to a lot of these, things. And then there are people who are like, well, does this, I don't know, like maybe is this a thing that's useful? I don't think that it's like yes or no. I'm not sure. At the end of the day, I think a lot of this does come to this question of, that you're kind of alluding to, this question of terms and who has control, who gets to decide. And at the end of the day, they don't. Like, they will be mapped if they can be. That's it. And then maybe then that will prompt a much larger and like bigger discussion of this. Well, what do we gain? What do we lose by this? But I think that's such a good question to ask because it is at the heart of so much of this.
Thank you. Hi, Mimi. So my question is a bit broad, so come at it like from whichever angle you choose to. So it's about the difference in the process of collecting qualitative and quantitative data. And so in your experiences, what have you observed in terms of how power is used, either like by people in academia or by people in the community themselves, and how and the type of data that's collected in marginalized communities?
What do you mean when you say marginalized communities?
Whichever way you take it. It could be like racialized folks, like folks in LGBTQIA+ communities,
right.
Like, you know, whichever sort of experience you want to draw from that one.
Right. Okay. So let me think about the best way to answer this. Okay, I think I'm going to go with the second part of this more. So I feel like there are kind of, let me see, I'm going to try to express this. I apologize. It might take me a minute. Sometimes I have to like think out loud. That there's actually, in some ways, this reminds me a bit of the answer to that question around civilians and the police and blah, blah, blah. I think something that I have found in some of the work I've done, just been working with various groups, is that there are two things. There's having the data to prove, okay, no, I'm gonna do this another way. Okay, so in some ways, there is this like tension that's at the heart of a lot of this that I just have not gotten into at all, which is that like collecting a data set proves a reality, but it also like reifies the need to prove that. Like it means that the other ways in which that has existed don't count. It means that if these people who have been like, we know we're not getting enough roles, we know we're not, all of us know this, that like us saying that means nothing. It's not scientific, it's not valid, but if we can just like come here, collect a data set, all of a sudden it's gonna be covered in the news, we're gonna see it here, we're gonna like do this whole, we're gonna do this gigantic thing. But then in some, like that does a thing, but then it also, as I said, it becomes a cyclical thing. Like it's that thing I was saying about how the need to collect, like it means that you then value the forms of collection, however it was I said it. And so you see, I see this in a lot of ways. So you can see this in some ways. Now, like I think there are a lot of conversations about ethics and AI and like bias in AI that are happening. And in some ways they do exactly this. It's like now we can see somebody like this camera, you know, people are trying to predict like how queer someone is using a model, or people are trying to like, you know, look at like this person didn't show up when he was applying for a passport application because the model wasn't trained on people on like, oh, this Asian man doesn't show up, so it's not trained on him, like all this stuff. Or like these Black people are tagged as gorilla. You see all these examples that keep coming up. And now it's like provided a way for us to be able to talk about that, which is good, which is really useful for different groups, and is not actually enough. It's just not a whole story. It's just not everything. Because again, then it makes it so that anything that you can't prove, anything that doesn't get made into a data set, isn't a thing that you can fight for with the same like rigor, or at least with the same like funding bodies coming up behind you. That's like just the tension that I think is there. And it's one that I have found a lot of groups sort of run into, where they're like, okay, well, we have to focus on the things that we can show, because the things we can't show, which might be in some ways more difficult or deeper or whatever, more challenging, don't matter. They don't count. What isn't counted doesn't count. So how are we going to talk about this? So I think that comes back to that quantitative thing. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mimi. Thank you, everyone, for your questions and participation. And I really hope you come to more of the events of this series. Like I said, they're all free, open to the public. You can follow us on Facebook or Twitter. Thank you to Element AI, QueerTech,